I was 21 years old when I had this near death experience, but I think it has to be a God thing because ordinarily I have a really bad memory. But this near death experience, even though it happened when I was 21, I have the ability to recall it just like it happened yesterday. So that's why I'm able to share my story with so much detail. So here's what happened. My dad was in sales and he won a sales contest. And part of what he won were these mopeds or these what we would call scooters today. And we used to ride these all over the neighborhood. One day I was out riding and I had an accident and I slammed into a tree. And the way that I landed, I tore the tendons off my right hand and needed to have surgery to have them reattached. Well, I had never spent really much time in a hospital. I had never had surgery before, so I didn't even know what to expect. So the day of the surgery, my mom drives me down, and we're in the operating room. And when they start to give me the anesthesia, I had a horrible allergic reaction, and the anesthesia stopped my heart, and I died. And that's how this whole thing started. This is how it all unfolded. Well, the very minute that I died, the next second, I woke up and I was standing in the most beautiful building I had ever seen. It was made of beautiful white polished marble, and it was this long, long corridor building. It was so long that I could not see the end of it. And something that one might be interesting for your viewers to look at is I found a temple in the country of Turkey. You may have even heard of it. It's called the Temple of Artemis, Artemis. And your listeners can do a Google search and they can see what this building looked like. Because what this building looks like in Turkey is very much what I saw in my NDE. Well, when I was standing in this building, and my first thought to myself was, I had no idea the hospital was this big. Because during my entire NDE experience, I didn't know that I had died. It wasn't until afterwards that I realized what happened. So I was in the middle of this building, and something I want to kind of set the stage for your listeners is a lot of times when we hear about near death experiences, we hear about that there's some kind of an accident or there's a person dies during surgery, and all of a sudden they find themselves floating above their bodies looking down at the scene. And then they're aware of a tunnel, and at the end of the tunnel there's a white light. And as this person starts moving down the tunnel, they're always met by somebody who crossed before them, either a relative, a parent, a family member, and this person tells them, it's not your time, you have to go back. So we have never known what happens when someone goes into the white light. Well, that's where my story really has some details because they started my near death experience on the other side of that white light. And I'll explain that. So I'm standing in this building, and off to my right, all the way down as far as I could see, were these beautiful white marble columns, maybe 20 or 30 feet high, about 6 feet apart. In the middle of this building were these tables. They were just like the size of an average kitchen table, but again, marble. And there were 4 benches on each side of these tables, and they went all the way down. And there were 2 people sitting at each one of these tables. Well, right about then, in my left ear, I heard, "My name is Alan. I'm your spirit guide." And I found out from this experience that all of us have spirit guides. And what they do is they help us plan our lifetime. And they're also with us throughout our life to make sure that we accomplish the things that we set out to accomplish. So, all the way through my entire experience, my NDE, my guide is talking to me in my left ear. And he was telling me everything I was seeing as we were going. Well, he said, look to your left, and I looked over to my left. And the only thing I can describe is that there were tunnels there. They looked like they had been doorways that were cut out of solid marble, absolutely beautiful, and they were black. It was like looking into space. And what happens is when a person dies, when they finish their lifetime, they go down this tunnel, they go into the white light, and where they end up is in the orientation center. My guide explained all this to me. And he said that the two people that are sitting at each one of these tables, they're called orientation counselors. And the reason that they're there is that they help us remember where we're from. Because Earth is not our home. We just come to Earth to learn and to experience. But the other side, if you want to call it heaven, the afterlife, the other side, that's where we're from. But very few of us, when we come into a lifetime, very few of us ever remember where we're from. Well, right about then, my guide said to look at the next tunnel. So I looked up, and there was a man coming through. He was an elderly gentleman, probably in his 80s or 90s, and he had his right hand over his chest, like he had heart pain or chest pain. And my guide said that he died from a heart attack. Well, he went in through the tunnel into the white light and ended up in the orientation center. Well, there was the woman that was closest to him. She stood up, she walked over to him, she took his hands in hers, and she walked him back to the table, and they sat down. And my guide explained to me that the orientation counselors, their job is to help people remember where they're from. Because as we mentioned earlier, when you come into a lifetime, most of us don't remember where we're from, and we get confused when we die. So these orientation counselors simply help people remember where they're from. So my guide said, watch him. So I was watching him. His back was to me, and I could see this woman. She was talking to him, but I was too far away to hear what she was saying. But all of a sudden, as I was watching him, he began to change. He changed from an elderly gentleman into a man in his early 30s. And my guide said, all of us are young on the other side. And because I didn't know that I had died during this whole process, I didn't think to ask any questions. Because that would have been one of the questions I would have asked is, why are we always in our 30s? My first thought was maybe it was because Jesus died in his 30s, but I don't know. I just know that we're all young. Well, as she was done talking to him, he stood up and he walked off to the right, and he walked down 3 steps between these columns, and he walked into an area that I call the gardens. I don't know if that's what the other side calls them, but that's what it looked like to me. And it was the most beautiful garden that I have ever seen. The greenest grass, emerald green grass with these beautiful trees and flowers everywhere. It looked like the most perfect manicured English garden you had ever seen. And my guide said, this is where we have the reunion. But what the reunion is when a person passes and they get back to the other side, they go through orientation, there are all these people in the garden waiting for you. All the people that he had ever known in his lifetime that passed before him are there. Plus, all the friends and family that he already had on the other side are there to greet him. And people were applauding, they were hugging him, saying congratulations. And I found out that the reason that they're there is that when you come to an earth life, it's a really big deal to come here because this world is considered to be the hardest of all the planets. So just the fact that a person comes here is an extraordinary achievement. So when you finish a lifetime and you go back to the other side, it's such a huge deal that you did that because so many souls don't want to come here. So he had the reunion, and I thought that was just such an amazing thing to witness. And I could see all these people there. And something else that is I thought was so extraordinary is all the animals that we have had in our lifetime, they're also on the other side. They make the transition just like we do. And God created these beautiful little companions for us that we have for eternity. So if you lost pets when you were a kid or had to put your animals to sleep, you haven't lost them. They're also on the other side and they're there when we get back. So that was the whole process of the reunion. The next thing what happened is my guide began to take me on this journey of this part of the other side. And what he did is he took me to the outside of these different buildings so I could see what they looked like. And then he took me to the inside. And one thing I don't understand is I don't really know where I was on the other side. All I know is that he was showing me a small part of what the other side is like. And for some reason, all the buildings that he took me to, they look like Greek or Roman architecture. And I don't know the significance of that, but it felt like I was on a college campus. Because you know how you have on a college campus, you have your science building, you've got your English building, you have your history building. That's kind of what it felt like. And all those buildings are in one general campus location. And that's kind of what it felt like. So the next building he took me to was this huge rectangular building. And there were columns, white marble columns, all along the perimeter of this building. So he takes me to the inside, and one of the rooms that he takes me to is a round room. It's like a theater, but it's completely round. And up at the top, there are movie screens all around the top in a circle. And there must have been 15 or 20 of these movie screens. And my guide said, everybody has a life review. And what he was telling me was that when a person passes and they finish their life, they go to this building and they have a life review. And all of a sudden, every one of these screens came on and they started playing a movie. But it was a movie about my life. One of the screens had me as a little toddler. Another screen showed me as, my first day of kindergarten. Another screen showed me in first grade. Another screen showed me playing soccer. And every one of these screens had a different episode of my lifetime playing. And it was so remarkable because you not only do you see your lifetime, but you also see the good things that you did. And one of the things that they were showing me was there was a boy in our elementary school class. His name was Troy, and he had some kind of disability. Maybe it was MS, but he had to walk with with kind of like support to help him walk, crutches, and he fell. And we went over and we helped picked him up. And that was one of the things that they showed me, because to the other side, that's what makes a difference to them. The whole life playing about money and having a big house and car and all of that, where you think that's a measure of success, that doesn't mean anything to the other side. What matters is who you were as a person. Did you care for people? Did you try to make a difference in people's lives? So they show you that during your life review, something that you would never have thought made any difference to you at all, but it made a difference to Troy, and they showed you that. Well, they also show you any things in your life that you did that may have hurt people, and you actually feel what that person felt when you did that kind of act or action to them. So the life review is a way to see how you did, and it also is a way that you learn, because that's one of the main reasons why we come to earth, is we come here to learn, to grow, and to experience. And something that was wonderful for me to learn is that there is no sense of judgment. The only person that goes with you when you review your lifetime is your guide, because your guide is the one that helped you plan your life. And it was so extraordinary because I was raised Catholic, and my dad was very Catholic. We went to church 2 or 3 times a week and also on Sundays. So I had always believed that there was going to be a hell, that there was going to be some kind of a final judgment. But I learned that God, this being that we call God, never created a hell. It doesn't exist. The idea of hell was created by humankind, not by God. And that was such a wonderful thing to realize, is that we don't have to worry about any kind of a judgment, because all of it is taken care of when you do your life review. So I thought that was just an extraordinary thing to know that our lives are actually reviewed to see how we did. The next building he took me to, again, was another huge rectangular building with columns, beautiful white marble columns. And he took me to the inside, and the room that he took me to looks like what we would call as a modern movie theater. It was long and it had a big screen up in the front of this room. And he told me, I'm going to show you past lifetimes. And this was something that was hard for me to really understand because being raised Catholic, we never talked about past lifetimes. It wasn't something that was ever talked about. It wasn't mentioned in the Bible, but it makes sense because we live for eternity. We can have as many lifetimes as we want. And I learned that nobody forces you to come into a lifetime. You basically can come into a life at any time you want to for any purpose. And it's strictly up to the soul if they want to do that or not. So on the screen, all of a sudden, he started to play three different lifetimes that I had. The first one, it was like watching a movie screen, and I was a monk. I had a shaved head, and I was wearing a red kind of a gown, and I was a monk in a monastery. And my job in that life was to teach kids about living in a monastery. And I knew just by looking at the screen that this life had taken place somewhere in Southeast Asia. And then that screen, it went blank. Then he played another past lifetime, and it was me pushing a wheelbarrow. And I had a bunch of shoes in that wheelbarrow. And my job in that life was to fix people's shoes. And one of the things I remember the most about this was that I was pushing this wheelbarrow on a cobblestone street. The third life he showed me was I was a fisherman and I was standing in a little rickety boat on a lake and I had nets and I was tossing these nets in the water to try to catch fish to help feed the village. That was part of my life in that lifetime was to help feed the village with fish. And that life took place somewhere in the Middle East. And then he basically explained to me that we live for eternity. That's how God created us. And you can have as many lifetimes or as few lifetimes as you want. And one of the things he explained to me is that the reason that we come here is that on the other side, there is nothing to work through. The other side, heaven, the afterlife, there's no conflict. There's no war. There's no corruption. There's no disease. There's no homelessness. There's nothing that will test your soul. And the reason that we come to a planet like Earth is that we go through different types of challenges, different types of circumstances that you have to work through. And the reason is it because when we were created, God gave all of us this desire to want to learn and to grow and to develop. And all of us throughout our lifetimes, we all like to learn. And that's one of the reasons we come to Earth because we learn the best when you go through something. And an analogy that has always made sense to me is trying to explain to somebody what it's like to ride a bike. You could tell them over and over again, but until they actually do it, they don't know what it's like. And that's why we come to Earth to experience and to learn. And everything that you go through, all the hard times, they make you better. You learn from that and you become more. And that's one of the reasons that we come here. So that was the past life building. The next place he took me to, I think was probably the most beautiful building that I saw there. It was round, this huge, gigantic round building. And I can't overemphasize how large these buildings were. We have nothing here on Earth that compares to how large they were. Maybe the closest thing is the size of the pyramids in Egypt, but all these buildings were just huge, and it was all a big circle, and there were marble columns all around the circle, and there was a big dome on top. And the building that I thought look the closest to what I've ever seen here on Earth is a building in Rome that's called the Pantheon. It's got a huge dome on top. And that's kind of what this building looked like. And then he took me to the inside, and he told me that this building is where we go when we plan lifetimes. He didn't tell me why we go here. I don't know the reason for it, but this is the place that we tend to go when we want to plan a lifetime. So he takes me in, and there's a beautiful marble table, and there's a scroll on top of it. Have you ever seen like Egyptian papyrus scroll? It's kind of brown looking. That that's kind of what this looked like, and it was rolled up, and it had a blue ribbon around it. Well, I walked over and I picked it up, and I took off the blue ribbon, and I unscrolled it on this table, and I could see immediately there was all kinds of writing on this scroll. And what it looked like calligraphy, the kind of writing that you used to have that ink pen. You would dip that ink pen in an ink well and then write out your. That's what it looked like. And my guide took me here to show me that all of us actually plan our lives ahead of time. All the major events of our lives are things that we had planned for ourselves. And as an example, like what country are you going to have a lifetime in? What language are you going to learn? Are you going to go to a university? What kind of career are you going to pursue? Are you going to have kids? All these things go into a lifetime. Well, when I tried to read my scroll, it folded up, and I wasn't allowed to read what I had written. And it was explained to me that if I knew ahead of time what I had planned for, I may not have put myself in the circumstances to learn those lessons. So I wasn't able to read the scroll at all. Just he wanted me to be able to tell people that our lives aren't random accidents, that we really do have a reason for coming here. And the higher purpose, again, is to learn. Well, I looked over to my right, and there was this huge wall. It must have been blocks and blocks long, and it was all full of scrolls, just like mine. And I realized that my guide had taken my scroll off the wall and placed it on the table. And I realized that everybody who was having a lifetime when I was there, all of them had scrolls on this wall. And when you have your lifetime and when you finish your life and you come back to the other side, you go grab your scroll and you can review it to see how you did. And the closest thing that I can think of this is when a lot of us will do New Year's resolutions at the end of every year. You start to plan out what you want to accomplish, what do you want to learn, what do you want to do in the new year. That's kind of what it feels like when you plan a lifetime. You have these goals and things you want to accomplish. Well, right about then, I looked over to my left, and there was this huge sprawling window, and I could see this is the first time during my NDE when I saw other people. And there was a walkway outside this window, and there were all kinds of people walking back and forth. And what it looked like was, when you go to a city and it's at lunchtime and you see all these people walking around going to lunch, that's kind of what it looked like. And people, they look just like we do. I have heard some people say that in their near death experience, where they see people, they're just orbs of light or orbs of energy. That's not what I saw. People look just like we do. Some people were taller, some people were shorter, some people had brunette hair, some people had blonde hair. In every race, every ethnicity was there also. So wherever my guide took me on the other side, it was an area that was just a huge, full of activity, full of people everywhere. And the other side of this walkway was something that I never forgotten, and I think it was one of my favorite parts of my NDE. On the other side of the walkway, there was a lake, and it was a round lake, and it was absolutely breathtakingly beautiful. I have never seen anything like it here on Earth. And my guide explained to me that everything that we enjoy here on Earth, they also have on the other side, and that includes nature. They have oceans and rivers and lakes and mountains, and everything that we love to do here, we can also do on the other side. And he explained to me that life on the other side is similar to what it's like here on Earth. You do things that you love to do. If you like to paint, you can do that. If you like to draw, or you like to hike, or you like to go to music festivals or take classes, you can do all those things on the other side just like you do here. Well, I was looking at the lake. It was so calm, it looked like glass, and it was so crystal clear that I could see the bottom of the lake. And all around the circumference of this lake were these weeping willow trees. And a lot of people have never seen weeping willow trees, but they're the kind of trees that have all their branches flow down into the ground, and all the branches, all the leaves were floating on the surface of this lake. It was just absolutely breathtakingly beautiful. The next place he took me to was it was still inside this dome building where we plan our lifetimes. And he took me to an area, this huge room that was full of books. And they were all on these bookshelves. And all the books looked the same. And he took me to a book where the only way what he described to me was everybody has a soulmate. And how it was described to me was that at the moment of creation, God created all of us with a perfect mate that we have on the other side. And he took me to the book, and all these books had gold lettering on them, but they didn't go horizontally. The writing went down, and it said Nina, Nina. And my soulmate's name on the other side is Nina. Her name is Nina. And my guide showed me this so that I could tell people that everybody really has a soulmate. So if you've never found your mate here on earth to be a soulmate, it doesn't mean that you're not worthy of that or that you don't have somebody. It just means that that soulmate may not have come into a lifetime with you. And that's something that I would have liked to have asked, because so many people have asked me, does your soulmate come into a lifetime with you? And my first inclination is that I just don't know. I don't think they always do. I think they can if they want to. But one of the ways that we learn the most when we have an earth life is by having relationships. And if you had a perfect relationship with you on earth, you may not have learned what you came here to learn. So the soulmates absolutely exist on the other side. So that was the building that had the big dome on it, the big dome with all the columns around the circle. The next one he took me to, I think, was my absolute favorite building that I saw. It was a huge, long, it looked like a stadium that you play soccer or football in, but absolutely huge. It didn't have any marble columns on it. It looked more like it was made out of some kind of metal. So we walk in, and I realized that it's full of thousands and thousands of seats, and all the lights were on, and it was super bright inside. I remember that very clearly. And where I was inside of a planetarium. And have you ever, when you were a kid, did you ever go to a planetarium?
Yeah, yeah,
You probably did. A lot of people go
yeah.
on field
I
trips.
actually love the planet. I was so much drawn to watching the stars. It was amazing, just so mesmerizing. It was
Yeah, yeah,
astronomy.
that's where I
Yeah,
was.
astronomy was my
Yeah,
favorite subject in school. It's
it
interesting.
was
Yeah,
mine also. I remember when I was in college, I signed up to take an astronomy class because I've always loved astronomy,
yeah,
but I had to drop it because I just could not understand the math. But I've always loved astronomy. So I was inside a planetarium, and they have planetariums on the other side. Had a big round roof on top, and there was a gentleman behind me. Remember how we talked about earlier that everybody on the other side tends to have jobs, but they don't do jobs because they have to work for a living. They just pursue the things that they love doing. And the gentleman that was behind me, he knew all about astronomy. He loved studying about planets and solar systems and galaxies, and he ran the planetarium. And he said to me, "Let's begin." And all of a sudden, all the lights went off. It was pitch black. And I sat down, and he said to me, "When you look at the stars, This is what you see. And what he was talking about was everybody on Earth at that time, with their level of knowledge and development, this is what they see when they look at the stars. And all of a sudden, he started showing our solar system. First, it was Earth, then our sun, then all of our planets, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, all of them showed up on this huge ceiling. And then they disappeared. And then he said, when you look at when or, I'm sorry, when he said, when we look at the stars, this is what we see. And he was referring to everybody on the other side at their level of knowledge and development. This is what they see. And all of a sudden, he started showing planet after planet after planet. First, there were dozens, then hundreds, and then thousands and millions of other planets. And they were all different colors. Some were blue, some were red, some were brown, some were yellow. And he said, there is far more life in the universe than you can possibly imagine. And my guide showed me this for two reasons. The first one was to tell me that Earth is not the only inhabited planet, that there are virtually unlimited other planets out there. And the second reason was to tell me that Earth is not the only place where we can come to have lifetimes. It's only one of billions of possibilities, but that Earth is the hardest of all of them. And I love this because do you remember the old series Star Trek with Captain Kirk?
Yeah.
Remember that show?
Yeah.
I loved that show growing up. And I had always believed, even when I was a little kid, that there had to be more than just this Earth. And something I like to tell your listeners to kind of give them an idea of how many planets are really out there. I was reading an article a couple of years ago from an astronomer, and she was trying to explain to the layperson how large the Milky Way galaxy really is. And she gave an example that if we had a spaceship that could travel at the fastest speed that we know, which is light, which is the speed of light, 186,000 miles per second, that it would take 99,000 years to get from one end of our galaxy to the other, just of the Milky Way. And she said that they have found so far 285,000 different galaxies, and they think that there are billions and billions of galaxies in the universe. And then she explained that they believe that there are 100 billion planets just in the Milky Way. So, can you imagine how many other planets are out there that we could have lifetimes on? It's absolutely, I can't even wrap my head around it. It's so incredibly large. So I think that was my favorite, what I call a planetarium. The next one he took me to was, I think, the largest of all the buildings that he showed me. It was a super huge, long building, and it didn't have any columns on the side. It only had columns in the front, and it looked like the Supreme Court building in Washington D.C. It had a triangular um, top, and it had the marble columns all along the front, and it had all these stairs walking up to the front of the building. So he took me to the inside, and the inside I realized it was a library. Absolutely gigantic. I can't even describe how large it was. And there were brown wooden bookshelves, and they must have been 20 feet high, full of books everywhere. And everywhere I looked, there were people. Some people were looking for books, some people were studying, some people were visiting. It was just full of activity. And he took me to an area on the left-hand side of this library. And what he took me to, they looked like what we would call as study rooms inside of a library. And they were probably about the size of an average living room. And he took me to one of these, and there was a woman in there. She was sitting on a couch, and she had her back to me, and she had jet long black hair down to her waist, and she was wearing some kind of a purplish kind of a gown or a tunic. and she was watching something. There was a wall in front of her, and it looked like at that time she was watching a large flat screen TV. And I remember thinking, wow, that's so amazing because my experience happened back in 1987, and we didn't have flat screen TVs back then. They were just big, bulky televisions, and you couldn't mount them on a wall. Well, she was watching this video screen that must have been 50 or 60 inches long, just this huge screen. And he told me to get closer so I could see what she was watching. Well, she was watching a battle with Native American Plains tribes on horseback versus the United States cavalry. And they were having this battle. And I thought that she was watching a movie, but my guide said, this is happening in real time. She's watching history. And I said, and I thought to myself, how is that possible? Because we didn't have video cameras back then. I don't think we even had cameras yet 200 years ago. And my guide said everything gets recorded. So if there's something that you want to learn about history, you can go to these rooms in this library and you can watch on these video screens anything you want to watch about history. Well, I still to this day, I don't understand how is it possible that everything gets recorded? And the only thing I can think of is that it's a God thing. God makes this happen because that's what happens when you do your life review. When you go to that building and you go to that round room with your guide, you can watch your lifetime and see how you did. So everything gets recorded. And one of the things that I have always been interested in since I was a little kid was learning about what just happened a couple of days ago, D-Day, the invasion of Normandy, France in 1944. I have always been interested in that. And that's one of the things I want to do when I get back to the other side is to be able to go to this library and review living history. So I just thought that was such an amazing thing because my guide was showing me that learning never really ends. You can learn for eternity, and there's always more to learn. And even though we come into life to learn, we can also still learn on the other side. So that was the library building. The next one he took me to was was a medieval castle, and it looked just like a castle that you would see today in France or England, made out of stone, beautiful, perfect castle made out of stone. And he told me to walk in, and the first thing I noticed when I walked in, it was red carpet everywhere. And you felt like you were royalty when you walked inside the castle. And on the walls on each side of me, on the right and on the left, these huge walls that went down as far as you could see. And on the walls were life-size paintings. And the paintings were of people that had lived during that period of Earth's history, what we would call medieval Europe. And the paintings were of the different people that had lived during that time period, like King George, for example, or Queen Elizabeth. And all of these paintings all the way down. Well, in front of every one of these paintings was a podium or a lectern. And on top of the podium, there was a book. And what the book was about that person's life. They had lived a public life, and all of that gets recorded. So if you're on the other side and you wanted to learn about what life was like in medieval Europe, you could go to this part of the other side. You could see the castles that they lived in, what they were like. You could walk in, you could look at the paintings, see what they looked like and what they wore, and you could also read about them in these books that are on these podiums. Well, right about then, I looked over to my right, and there was a staircase that wound down from the upper floors to the lower floor, and there was a woman who was walking down this staircase. She had strawberry blonde hair, and she was wearing kind of a peach colored gown or a tunic. And she walked up to me. She could see me, and she spoke to me. And she said, "Is there anything I can help you find?" And Sergey, I said the stupidest thing to her that I still don't know why I said this, but I said to her, no thanks, I'm just looking. And I could have asked her anything. Who are you? Where am I? I thought I was supposed to be having surgery. What's happening? But my guide said to me that on the other side, what this girl loves to do is she loves to study history about medieval Earth. So if you're on the other side and you wanted to learn about that particular time of Earth's history, you could go to this library and you could talk to her. And she was like what we would call a professor. You could ask her anything about that particular period of Earth's history, and she would tell you. So the other side is full of opportunities and ways that you can learn, because learning goes on forever. And the and I'm almost done. I know I'm been talking for a while.
No, 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 that's okay. That's okay. So let's continue to the story.
Okay, sure, sure. And that's something that I forget. A lot of times people ask me, because was when I had my experience, I remember every single detail like it happened yesterday. I've lived with this knowing that the other side is real for all of these years, 30 years, knowing that home is the other side, that our earth lives are not home. And I forget sometimes what it's like for people to hear my story for the first time. And it really is extraordinary. And I look at my experience, my NDE, as a piece of a jigsaw puzzle, that all of us are trying to put this big puzzle together. And each one of us has a little piece of a jigsaw puzzle. And I think the most significant piece of my jigsaw puzzle is that we finally know what happens when people cross into the light at the end of that tunnel. They end up in the orientation center. So I always think of my experience as being that part of the jigsaw puzzle. Well, here's the last part of my NDE, and it probably was the most impactful part that I experienced. My guide took me to a field, and it was the most beautiful field, this meadow that I had ever seen. It was green grass, wildflowers were growing. It was a perfect day. The sun was out, and it was just a perfect day. And then my guide disappeared. He left. And right in front of me, there was a gentleman, and I could see he was wearing a white robe, and he had a golden sash around his waist, and he was wearing gold colored sandals that laced up his calves. And when I looked at him, I knew instantly that this was the person that we would call Jesus, who lived his life as Jesus here on earth. And he was right in front of me. Well, he was different than everybody else that I saw, because when I tried to look at his face, there was so much light, so much energy coming from him that I could not see his facial features. It was kind of like lightning coming out of his face. He was so bright. Well, he spoke to me and he said, "You must tell them there is no death." In the very second he said that, boom, I was right back in my body in the operating room. And that's officially how my story ended. And that was my whole NDE. So all of my life, I have tried to live my life in such a way that I tell people what he told me. Because it was so interesting. It was because he didn't say it in a way that, he didn't say, you know what, John, when you have time, when it's convenient for you, can you share with this experience with other people? It wasn't like that. It was like, you must tell them there is no death. And so all these years now, I've just been trying to share my story with anybody who will listen. Because for me, it has given me the greatest amount of hope to know that when our loved ones pass, that they aren't really gone. They're just in a different place. And when our time comes, we're all going to be reunited again and we'll all be together. And I think that has given me the the drive to want to share my story. And it has been such a privilege to have people tell me that my experience really has changed their lives. And that makes me happy to be able to do that for people.
I want to thank you again. This was amazing, amazing story. And I hope Hollywood is going to make a movie. I hope one day Hollywood is going to get to that level of consciousness when they're going to start making movies like this, not like a 40 years old virgin or stuff like that where they spend the money.
Yeah.
But this is the kind of films they have to make. By the way, I usually ask about the book a little later on the podcast, but I want to ask you now, do you have a book written about this?
You know what? I don't, but I have
Okay,
thought for so long that I should. So I'm actually considering doing that because I think it
okay,
would reach more people.
okay. So that's great, yeah. Uh, yeah, you should write one. Maybe, maybe you will get to Hollywood and one day it will be made a great movie. Because a lot of this imagery you described, it's like I've seen somewhere this you described. Maybe I've seen it in my past life. Maybe I've seen it in heaven. But sometimes we see these AI made images right now. They're so popular right now. People make this artificial intelligence art,
Yeah.
and you see a lot of what you described right now. And I'm thinking that people who had near death experience or had out of body experiences, they're probably creating this artificial intelligence art. They're trying to
Yeah.
create and to show what they've seen.
It's interesting you say that because what they told me on the other side was that everything that we have here on Earth was first on the other side. So the buildings that were made of marble in the Greek and the Roman type of architecture, I think people got those ideas to make them from what they remember from the other side. And again, those buildings, they're only in that small area that I was in. So the other side it's kind of like a planet. It's just ginormous. It's like a planet. But the place that they took me to, for some reason, I don't know why, but they all looked kind of like they were Greek or Roman architecture.
Yeah, it's interesting that every near-death experiencers they have different visuals. Some see nature, some souls see their relatives, their grandmother. Some just see some kind of beautiful lighting. Some see Jesus or
Yeah.
Buddha, and you saw all this architecture interesting.
What's really interesting too is when I was having my NDE, you don't think that there can be buildings over there, but there were, and they were solid. They were just as solid as if you were to touch your desk. It feels like that. And in terms of physics, that shouldn't be possible. But on the other side, it's more real over there than our experience is here on Earth. And I
I've
can't
heard that.
explain how that's
Yeah,
possible.
I heard that from almost from everybody who I interviewed. They say it's more real over there, and we can't imagine that. How can be more real over there?
Yeah, I can't explain it. I can't even explain how that's possible.
Yeah, but you
I
see,
can't
every
even
time,
explain.
yeah, and every time you tell this story, I imagine that you are full of energy and you're full of happiness. You recreate that feeling again that you felt in your NDE.
Yeah,
Yeah, because I see that
absolutely.
your face is glowing and you're so inspired when you're telling that.
The one thing that is was really interesting to me is that on the other side, when you're there, you can feel God. You can feel this being that we call God. You can feel how much He loves and cherishes every single one of us. It was the most extraordinary feeling that I have ever had. And before I had my NDE, I would have this feeling in my stomach that something is missing. There's something more to all of this. There's got to be something more. What is it? And on the earth, the best way that I can describe it, it's like when you come into an earth life, it's like being in a battle or you're in a war and you're in a foxhole without a radio. You feel cut off. And when you're on the other side, that feeling that you miss, it's fulfilled over there. And it's that feeling of God, how much He loves and cherishes us. And that was, I think, probably the most extraordinary feeling that I had. In fact, it was so hard for me when I came back. I must have been through this horrible depression for at least 2 months because I did not understand how was I supposed to live the rest of my life knowing how beautiful the other side is and where we're from. And as much as I tell my story, I don't have the language or the words to really describe what it's like there. It's an absolute paradise beyond anything I can possibly describe. And like to tell people that there's so much for us to look forward to. You don't remember how beautiful it is. We have so much to look forward to when we finish our lifetimes and we get to go back.
Yeah, that's a question I was going to ask you. How did you feel when you came back into that hospital room and there was such a huge contrast? It's like they hit you in the head with something really heavy, right? That's the feeling you
Yeah,
had.
yeah, yeah. The first thing when I opened my eyes and I was back on that operating table, I said, "What just happened?" And he said that the surgeon said that we lost you. And the weirdest thing was that I felt like I was on the other side for an hour or two, going through this whole experience. But the surgeon told me that they lost me for 7 minutes. I actually died and I was gone only for 7 minutes. And that's when I realized that there really is no concept of time on the other side. Time really only seems to exist here on Earth. So when I realized what had happened, I went through a real deep depression because I just did not know how was I going to make it here. But then I realized what Jesus told me when he said, "You must tell them there is no death." And that kind of gave me this sense of the other side told me what I'm supposed to do with my life because the experience that they showed me wasn't for me. I'm just the messenger. And it's so funny because I've always wondered, why did they give me that information? Why didn't they give it to Oprah or someone like you who has a podcast? I don't have anything. I'm nobody. I don't have a book. I don't have a podcast. I don't even have a website. I just tell people because I love to tell the story and I think it helps people. But I don't know why they gave it to me because I don't have an audience. I've
Yeah,
always wondered that.
what do you mean you don't have an audience? If you look at all podcasts that you've done, there should be, I'm not sure, I didn't watch them, but there should be several million views already and counting. That's a huge
You know what?
platform.
I've never thought about it like that.
There's millions of people watch you and they share and they talk about it. I got in my comments a lot of people telling me, please listen to John Davis' story.
Absolutely. I think of it. Yeah, I think of everybody's experience like we're all pieces of a jigsaw puzzle, and we're all trying to put the big puzzle together.
Yeah, and you came back like Jesus told you. So you were sure this was Jesus?
Oh yeah, I had, and he didn't tell me. He didn't say who this was. I just knew that this was the being that we called Jesus.
Okay.
I just knew that. I just had this overwhelming knowledge that
Yeah.
this was him. This was Jesus.
Yeah, because for I interviewed, I would say, I don't know, probably 35 near-death experiencers, and just a few of them seen Jesus. Just like
Yeah.
several, probably 4 or 5.
You know what was interesting? When I was there, he was standing in front of me. I had the most extraordinary feeling from him about the idea of religion. And I got the sense from him that he doesn't care what religion you follow, that there isn't just one religion. I got the sense that if whatever religion or philosophy you follow, if that brings you closer to God, that's the right one for you. I did not, when I was having my NDE, I didn't get the sense that, well, this person is a Buddhist. This person over here is a Catholic. This person over here is a Hindu. I didn't get that impression. It was more like it's this deep spirituality as opposed to a religion, because I don't believe that any religion on earth has all the truth. I think that all the religions have some truth to them, but there isn't just one way to God. And that's what I got this feeling from Jesus, was that whatever religion gets you closer to God, that's the one to follow. And I just had this overwhelming sense of just compassion and love coming from him, because he knows how hard it is for us while we're here, because he had been through it. He was crucified. He knew the worst of humanity. He experienced it. And still he was just full of love and compassion and total understanding about everything we go through here.
Yeah, so why do you think Jesus came back to earth? He came here to experience what we experience so he can teach about God more powerfully. I don't know. What's your take on this? Why Jesus came back to earth to stay here for 33 years?
I've thought about that a lot, because we all come here for a reason. We all have reasons for being here. None of us are accidents. And I think when I read the scriptures, when I read the Bible, the overwhelming thing seems to be what Jesus taught was to love each other. There's a One of my favorite scriptures in the Bible is from John, the Gospel of John, chapter 15. And Jesus says, "This is my command, love each other." That's all he said. It's probably one of the shortest verses in the whole Bible. This is my command, love each other. And I think that's what he came here to teach, was just to love people.
Yeah, and this is the main message.
I think of my experience as that there's two reasons why we come here. The first one, of course, is for us to learn and to grow, because we all have different reasons for coming here. To learn is the number one reason. Well, the second reason I think we're here is to help people. And one of the ways that I have lived my life, or I have tried to live my life, is based on what the Dalai Lama said many years ago. He said, "Our prime purpose in this life is to help others. And if you can't help them, at least don't hurt them." So I've always believed that there are two reasons why we're here: to learn and to help others, to make a difference with your life. Because I know from my NDE that when you finish your lifetime and you go back to the other side, they're not going to ask you, were you successful? Did you have all the trappings of what we think on earth is success? It's totally irrelevant to them. They don't care how much money you had. All they care about is, what difference did you make with your life? Did you learn what you came here to learn? And did you help others along the way? That's all they care about.
You're absolutely correct here. Most people that I spoke to, they this is the main message they deliver is love. They just
Yeah.
talk about.
Yep.
I said, "What did you realize? What did you bring with you from the other side?" He said, "Love, love each other. That's all."
Yep.
And yeah,
Exactly.
and it's very simple. Yeah. So, the library building, is that the Akashic records?
You know what? You know what? So many people have asked me that. And my guide didn't tell me what it was, but from what I saw, everything that you ever wanted to learn is in that library. Anything about science or history or religion or music, everything that you want to learn, you can go to this library. And that's what people have told me is the Akashic records. So it's very likely that that's where I was. Another reason, too, is that other people have told me that when they have seen this building, it's exactly how I describe it: huge, long marble building, columns only on the front with that kind of triangular roof, and all these steps leading up to the front. So I think that it probably was that building. My guy just didn't tell me what it was called.
Yeah. Well,
But yeah,
people
I
call
think it was.
some people call it Akashic records. Now, were you able to contact that spiritual library while being back here on Earth all these past 30 years? Let's say you need an answer to a question. We all have those questions all the time. Life is hard here, like you said. How did you find the answers? Did you go into meditation or in prayer, or you just come back to that Akashic records to get the answers?
You know, I have people have asked me if I've had any kind of new ability since I had my NDE. Did I have the ability to talk to my guide? Did I have the ability to go back to this library? I never have had anything that's ever happened to me.
Okay.
Um, and I think that the most, well, I think what the other side gave me was the memory of what I experienced to be able to share it. Because ordinarily, I have a really bad memory. Like, I can't remember what I had for dinner last night. But this memory is so solid that I remember every detail. But I did have one thing happen to me 8 years ago that has been the only thing that I've ever had of a paranormal nature. And it was when my wife's dad died. He died 8 years ago. And 3 days after he passed, he came to me in a dream. And ordinarily, I don't remember my dreams either. Maybe I might remember it for 15, 20 minutes afterwards, but then I forget. Well, this dream I've never forgotten. And my wife's dad came to me and he said, "Everything is going to be all right. We're all going to be together again. Nothing happens by accident. And please tell my family I'm okay." And I woke up and I wrote everything down. So that's how I remember it to this day. But that's been the only thing that's ever happened to me that's been of a paranormal experience.
Okay, I had some guests that never had a near-death experience, but they claim to go into the Akashic records and get any answers. Let's say I can ask any question and they can go into meditation or in a trance and get any answer I need. Do you believe in that? Do you think that's real or not?
I think it's possible. I think people can. I don't know how to do that. But I've heard from so many people that some people do have the ability to do that. I think it probably is real.
All right, you mentioned Nina, your soulmate on the other side. Is your wife jealous of Nina?
You know what? When I told her, she actually was. She was. I thought that was funny because I had never thought that before. But
Yeah,
she definitely was. Yeah. And I don't know. Yeah, people have asked me. They said, "Well, is your wife Nina?" And I have no idea. I I don't know. I have no clue.
yeah.
But she could be. I don't see any reason why it's not possible.
So this happened with you 30 years ago. How this knowledge affected your life?
Oh yeah, absolutely. There were two things I think really. The first one was, as we talked about a little while ago, I was raised Catholic, very Catholic, and my whole life was based around religion. Well, after I had my NDE, all of that overcoming or all of that overshadowing of religion disappeared, and I became much more spiritual. I wasn't concerned about religion or about judgment or about hell because God never created a hell. He loves us too much to toss us into a fiery pit for all eternity. There is no hell. It doesn't exist. So I became much more spiritual. I still like to study religion. I always find it fascinating how people relate to God and how they try to understand life. So I do like to study religion. I still to this day I spend about 30 minutes every day reading the Bible because I really like it. So I consider myself 50% Christian. I believe in Jesus and what he came to teach. I just don't believe in all the dogma about religion. So that's the first thing that I learned. The second thing that I learned most importantly was Earth. It's almost like it's backwards here. It's almost like the values are so completely turned around that it doesn't make any sense. Because we think on earth that success is based on how well you do. Are you successful with your business? Do you make this kind of money? Do you live in this kind of a house? And to the other side, that's not success. To the other side, success is, did you learn what you came here to learn? And did you help others along the way? That to them is what success is all about. So those were the two things that I think I learned the most when I had my NDE.
Now you mentioned that your guide, your spirit guide, told you that there is no hell.
Hmm.
I had a guest on my show, his name is Dominic, and he said that he went to hell. He was shot and he went to hell. And he described his experience in such a vivid detail. It's crazy. They're gonna make a movie about this probably. Hollywood like this kind of
Yeah.
scary stuff. And there's a lot of views. There are over 115,000 or something at this point. A lot of views. And what do you think? This was a hallucination? Some kind of hallucination he had, or he went to hell?
Well, I can tell you what I know, and the other side is made up of levels. I don't I can't describe it because I don't know. I was just told this, that the other side is just, has levels to it, and the levels are based on your spiritual growth. And it was explained to me that the other side has beautiful levels of knowledge and spirituality, but there are also lower levels where people who have not had a whole lot of experiences to develop their souls, that's where they congregate on the lower levels. And my understanding of what people have described as hell are these lower levels. So all of us, when we die, we cross over to the other side, and we tend to go to the level that we most feel the most comfortable with. So the only thing that I can think of when people say that they went to hell is that they went to the lower levels.
Okay.
Because on the other side, thought is real. Thought is a real thing, and you can create almost anything you want from thought. That's what the other side, that's what these lower levels are like. They're lower levels of people that just haven't developed a whole lot, and they tend to congregate there. And a lot of the experiences is what people would say is hell. But God never created a place that's in the Bible that we call hell, that souls get tossed away to for eternity. It's almost like it's just like our own kids. We would never create a place for our own kids that we would toss them away. God gives all of us as many chances as we need to learn and to grow. And that's one of the reasons why we have the life review. Because if you were the kind of person in earth that you hurt people, you will feel what your actions made that person feel on the other side. And that's one of the best ways that souls learn and grow, is by knowing how they affected other people.
It's interesting that we talk right now. You remember people used to say, well, if we never die, how come no one ever comes back? Now, I just got a statistic, just pulled the statistic before our conversation, and it says 5 to 10% of general population have memories of NDE. That's about 450 million people.
That's a lot.
400, it's a lot. And this is only people probably who talked about it. I'm not sure, but it's a lot, yeah. So 450 million people cannot lie,
I
right?
agree. Yep, I agree.
And the experiences are so similar. The imagery is different. You've seen buildings, they saw nature, somebody saw their family, but the feeling is love. Everybody felt the same feeling.
Yeah,
Well, except this
I
guy,
agree with that completely.
yeah. Except some of them who go to lower levels, but they expected to go to these levels.
Yeah,
Well, this is my 5 cents here. All right, John. So I understand you have no book, but if people want to find more about you, if you can mention your podcast or email or something, if you like them to
Sure. Yeah,
contact you. Yeah,
I am more than I am more than happy. People can email me anytime, and I get back to everybody.
yeah.
And the best way to reach me, my email is John J Davis 65 at iCloud.com. So if anybody wants to write me, they can contact me anytime, and I get back to everybody. It's my pleasure to do that.